Yeah.
So keep going. Go ahead.
So kind of what I was telling her is she has the physical prowess, like the physical ability to jump 5 feet as a sixth grader. The technical proficiency of taking off was pretty easy to develop because she's got a history of playing volleyball, which means she's jumped a lot.
Yeah.
It's the delivery and reaching the bar from the start of the approach that is her technical problem. If she cleaned that up even a little bit, she's a much better jumper.
So let me ask you this. And this is what I've noticed in volleyball players in general. The difference between them trying to do a flop versus the scissors and the ground contact time, like the ground contact time, they understand, especially like an outside hitter, how to plant that leg for a scissor jump because
Yeah.
it's more vertical in nature, less speed related, and they have more time on the ground. So correlation between that scissor and the flop with those volleyball players. What do you think? Do you see that there is correlation, or do you see that like the scissor doesn't necessarily translate to a good high overall high jumper?
I'm a big believer in scissor jumping. Um, I think it's really big because I think one of your biggest limiters is how high can you get your hip.
Yeah.
What I've seen for volleyball players is especially at like the club level because they're coached heavily. So everything they hear a lot.
Mm,
Your volleyball player jumping square up to the net, square up to the net, square up to the net, getting a volleyball player to plant and then rotate away from what you're letting like what you're jumping over is probably the biggest thing. So this girl yesterday, we videoed a couple jumps, and one of the first things that stood out is her eyes would not release the bar or the standard. She would
okay.
look at one or the other, and she wouldn't let go of it with her eyes, which means she's watching the bar as she's trying to pass the standard.
Yeah.
And I have a most of the volleyball players I coach, like I have a gal on our team now, played volleyball in the fall. I mean, she's playing at the collegiate level, so she's been doing this a long time. And one of the things that was really hard to get her to do is break her gaze off the bar, like attach it to the bar at a certain point, but then you got to let go and
Yeah.
rotate away from the thing you're jumping over, which is so antithetical to square up to the net.
Yeah.
You know, it would make no sense for a volleyball player to rotate away when they jump. So so I found as soon as I got her, we started working like visual cues and her flop started to clean up a lot.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of kind of messing with like, man, you're great until your hips start to pass the bar.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it all stops. I'm like, what's the deal? And then I watched her head and I'm like, oh yeah, you're not letting go of the standard.
Yeah.
So
That's where
so yeah, I think it's
that correlation in triple jump more so. Like I see volleyball players able to coordinate triple jump a lot easier than high jump.
interestingly, she's also wanting to triple jump, and I get she's for a sixth grader, she's pretty good at it. She's got her marks are good,
Yeah.
um, and I would venture a guess that like with a small amount of coaching, she's going to be pretty remarkable. Um, just learning the difference between takeoffs. It's kind of funny that I was like, yeah, your two events are the two that have the most different takeoffs for triple jump and high jump.
Yeah.
Um, Even high jump and long jump is high jump and pole vault. Like all of those are actually more similar than triple. But
Yeah.
yeah, she was awesome. I mean, physically she's astounding. It's just a really really easy drills getting her to let go of the bar with her eyes, and then it's just the technical proficiency. It was really funny. We were doing some drills to work on approach rhythm, and her opening movements always had her hips and feet moving laterally.
Mm,
I
yeah.
was like, that's so volleyball of you.
Yeah. 100%. So earlier
So
you said she needs to clean up her sprint mechanics. How do you correlate sprint mechanics with a vertical jumper, but also talking about sprinting in horizontal jumps. It's obvious, why you
Yeah.
need to be a proficient sprinter in horizontal jumps. But why do you think that's necessary for a vertical jumper?
Yeah, the big thing with the vertical jumps. I think I actually would say more so you have to have better sprint mechanics in high jump because of the curve.
Okay.
You are you have to be confident in your ability to be tall, long, and then to lean, strike the ground at an angle, increase the angle of lean with every step. The ability to connect with the ground appropriately becomes more challenging because of centripetal and centrifugal force.
Yeah.
So, so getting into the curve is one thing. This girl particularly, she just, you know, couldn't put her hips through. So
Yeah.
she did really good to start, but she didn't get her hips all the way through and wasn't tall entering the curve. Then she wasn't tall. She's striking kind of flat footage. I was, I guess, the first person who told her, like, when you sprint, we're not slamming our heels into the ground. Uh, and
Another
my
volleyball.
abs, yeah, she was totally like, she was like, what? I'm like, yeah, man, this is crazy. Uh, which created a new challenge because she's already got a little bit of a banged up ankle. But when you're entering the curve, one, you only have really 4 to 5 steps to get speed going. So 3 steps to accelerate, and we say 2 steps
Yeah.
to go from acceleration to tall. So you have way less time than a long jumper or a flat sprinter to get into good sprint mechanics.
True.
Then you're making it more challenging by putting it on a curve where you have to strike the ground with an increasing rhythm, still staying tall but leaned, which is so unnatural. And then you have to convert it into jumping. So the correlation is 100%. Like, can you create the forces you need to take off and flop properly? Um, one of the things that I like to really reinforce with kids is, like, they all want this, like, beautiful flop. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, man, we all do, but he's not the best example right now because I think he didn't finish great at the trials. But like Javon Harrison, like, he doesn't have an amazing flop, but he creates the forces he needs and he rotates the way he needs to rotate
Yeah.
to get over the bar, which is the event. The event is not flopping. The event is getting over the bar.
Mhm.
And so kind of what I reinforced with her specifically was, like, essentially, like, I have a joke. I'm like, flop happens. Like, it happens. That
Yeah.
you don't have to make it happen. So take care of the ground, take care of the takeoff, and if you just do the right stuff, the flop will be there.
Mhm.
So so I think, if you're coming into that flop position with poor mechanics, or you're coming into takeoff with poor sprint mechanics, it you're one, you're not getting off the ground as effectively as you could. You're not lowering as effectively as you could. Um, I love the image I think Altus recently posted of someone sprinting, and it's like a series of boxes stacked on top of each other. And if one box is
Yeah.
tipped and you're
Yeah.
on the ground, well, it's the same deal. You have to have all your boxes stacked. You have to be in a good position to take off because that's a huge force. So, so I think one of the big things is, like, getting into that takeoff position really well sets you up for a good jump as well. But you have to have good sprint mechanics to get there because everything falls apart once you hit the lean if you're not in a good spot.
I feel like, especially at this level, like sixth grade through 12th grade, everything is so reactionary to what they're seeing, like what the problem looks like. And we forget that there is something that happened to lead to that cause. So especially you see it in the horizontal jumps, you see it in the triple jump, particularly when an athlete doesn't set their approach up properly, the hips are already in the bad position, and then they just can't get a good phase. And then what's coached is, oh, you got to get that leg around, you got to get that knee up, all that, and we forget
Yeah.
what gets us there. And I have to combat this all the time because in a way I coach these kids, it's so all they watch is these guys talking about getting their knees in the right position and being big in those movements, but then they don't realize that speed is what creates that displacement and then creates the positions. But then you need to be able to control your hips at takeoff, your approach at takeoff, and all of that to be able to get those positions.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the more effective questions I've learned to develop is asking them, what were you trying to do there?
Go ahead.
Oh, I've learned to ask the question like what were you trying to do there? Um, because a lot of times high jump's a really good example. It happens in long and triple though too. High jump, it's like, all right, what were we trying to do on that jump? And when the answer is, oh, I was trying to get my hips up.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, you know, let's break down how your hips get up. And let's break down why maybe you felt like they weren't. And this is why I think, especially for younger kids, video is really important
Yeah.
because they don't have the proprioceptive abilities to like understand where they are in space all the time.
Yeah.
So I will often find that you have a kid run a rep and it could be long, it could be triple or high, it could even be sprinting, and you could say like, well, hey, what were you trying to do there? And they'll come back with a mechanical or a technical execution thing they were working on, and you say like that's 100%. Watch this video, like in high jump especially, like your hips were up, man. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like they were up. I'm like, and let's talk about why you didn't feel like they were up. But like watch this video and see how your hips were up. Now let's talk about what we actually want to do. Why did the bar come off, or why did you feel like it wasn't an effective jump? Because myself included, I thought I had a great squat pattern, and someone showed me a video of it, and I was like, oh God, what? It.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value to that, but yeah, they're trying to recreate the Christian Taylor in the triple jump, and you're like, one, let's not.
Yeah.
You're not him today. Uh, and they'll say, oh, I'm trying to hit that position. I'm like, well, where did that concept come from for you? And they're like, oh, well, I was watching Will Clay videos. And it's like awesome. Love Will Clay. He's a great jumper. You're not him. And Will Clay can probably hit 12 plus meters per second on the runway, and is an astounding bounder.
Yeah.
And it's like, cool. Which piece of that do you have? Cool. You're a great sprinter who's triple jumping. Awesome. Let's emulate maybe his sprint. But when it comes to jumping and you're not a super strong bounder, let's kind of let go of the Will Clay model at that point.
Yeah. Now, how do you feel? So this is not quite off topic, but sprint mechanics versus runway mechanics, like on a horizontal jumper, runway mechanics. I don't think a lot of coaches at the high school level talk about the difference in what a run on a runway looks like versus the sprint. It's just sprint. And then kid, even if a kid has good sprint mechanics, they're still different than runway mechanics.
Yeah. Yeah, for kind of how I like to coach it, this is also event specific. So
Yeah.
Long jump and sprints are going to probably be the two closest. But for the way I break it down, the simplest is one, repeatability is so important.
Yeah.
So we all have to accept like you cannot repeat 100% 6 times in a competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's not possible because 100% means the next rep is always depleted. So 100% repeatability is not there. So you have to have a repeatable runway. I think indoors you have a lot more forgiveness, so you can be a little more reckless and be like, cool, yeah, we're just going to rip it down the runway and in the long jump. Outdoors though, you're contesting with wind. Sometimes, in Illinois, it's rain, snow, maybe hail, possibly a tornado, or 90 degrees. So you're gonna feel different every time down the runway. So you have to have an established rhythm. My big focus is always, we do have to take off. My top guy right now, he wants to jump 15 meters in triple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, you got to take off somewhere around 19 to 20 miles per hour at the board.
Yeah.
You don't have to be 20 miles per hour, 40 feet from the board, but at the board, we have to be there. So if you're talking about how are we going to, if he tries to run 20 miles per hour for a full sprint, he can do it maybe twice per 60 in a day, but he's taking 6 triple jumps.
Yeah. And I'm
There's no
assuming
way
if you're looking at 50-foot triple jumper, he's probably like 9 to 11 step jump foot. So like 18,
um
22 steps in his approach.
yeah, right now he's jumping 47 off of a 6.
Sick. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's sick.
So okay. So well, he's
He's
more of a
ridiculous.
power jumper. Like that's how I was. I mean, I had
Yeah.
a approach, but that was because I took so long to get up to speed. But you know,
Yeah.
contact times were a lot higher than some of my counterparts.
He's also really fast. So he gets up to speed quickly. I think we did get back to a 7 step to jump over 47. Um, our goal this year is we are going to try to get back to an 8 or a 9 jump step.
Mhm.
Uh, but we had big mechanical stuff on his takeoff to work on. But kind of to the original question, it's it has to be repeatable.
Yep.
It has to be accurate, which means everybody wants to be fast on the runway, but if you're ultra fast on a windy day, you're trying to hit an 18 centimeter line. You can't go all out from step 1 6 times in a row on a windy day and hit an 18 centimeter line.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, it's the runway has to be repeatable. You have to establish rhythm and you have to establish postures. In a 60 meter, 100 meter, a 200 meter, you have so much more time to push, to go from low to high, to upright mechanics. In an approach for a jump, you have maybe, I think at the elite level, I was counting steps during the trials, a lot of 20s, a lot of 21s, 22s, 22 total steps. That's 120 feet, so
Yeah.
30, 40 meters, where working backwards, I have to be tall and ready to jump at the end of that, which means my last 2 steps are not true sprint steps. That means the 3 steps before my penultimate have to also be like as fast as possible, as mechanically sound as possible, and as repeatable as possible,
Yeah.
which means I can't be running max speed 3, 4 steps before that. So, I mean, just working your way backwards, it's like, cool. I have to build my rhythm and I have to end at speed. And I think that's one of the things that, without like naming names or calling people out, I think the concept of sprinting at full speed to be a jumper is awesome. Like I love that idea. I love the aggression to it, but also at certain levels, like the next level of jumping, it's a competition. Like it's 6 jumps. Um, I can't count how many times you get prelim jumps are like, ah, man, yeah, no one's really hitting it today, and everybody's just grinding out the mark to get into finals. And then you get into finals, and all of a sudden, everyone goes nuts. Well, yeah, man, if you blew it in prelims because you blew your legs out sprinting all the way to the board every rep, and now everybody's catching up to you in finals, and you have no response because your legs are shot, like that's not useful.
Yeah. So
You know,
uh I like the idea of a jumper being considered a sprinter. I think that there's a lot of
yeah,
correlation there. Especially because on when you keep saying repeatability, like if you got a guy that can consistently hit a 23 mile per hour, fly 20 or something like that, or fly 10, you got a kid that can repeat 20 miles an hour all day.
yeah,
And if you need 20 miles an hour to be able to be a 50-foot triple jump, and let's just say it's that correlation, let's make it that easy, then you're
yeah.
looking at a guy that needs to be considered, or do true sprint work,
Oh
where
yeah,
instead of worrying so much about the jump, the top end speed needs to be there. And if we're talking about max effort sprinting, that's your biggest plyometric stimulus you're going to get, to create power.
yeah,
It I used to, and I have gotten away from this, but I want to get back to it, is coupled approach work runway work and fly work back to back to give the athlete the understanding of what does control feel like on the runway and what does like violent uncontrolled speed feel like through a fly 10. And
Yeah.
when you start to get those two on the understanding of those two, then you can start to talk about like, all right, when you're hitting top speed, you should be at the board, but that top speed feels different than when you're just blasting through 10 meters on a set of gates.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
one of those things where you're like, it's interesting because kids don't realize it. And at
Yeah.
this level, especially with like super novice athletes in general, at the high school level, like well, I'm not even like sprint mechanics are number one. Like we just got to get them to understand how to sprint
Yeah.
comfortably, then get them on the runway and understanding that there's a difference between the two. So
Yeah.
what now, how do you feel about the two like the athlete that does both, right? So I have a girl who's
Yeah.
not a particularly like good jumper. Not to say that she's not a super talented athlete. She's a
Yeah.
junior in high school, ran multiple 58 splits in the 4x4, multiple sub 60 400s. Just not necessarily talented in that regard for a horizontal jump. Was like it's like a 10-meter triple jumper. Not bad, but not gonna be, the next Olympian. So,
Yeah.
I love that she does that stuff because there's a correlation and it helped her in the sprint side, but she was considered a jumper freshman, sophomore year. Junior year, we're like, you're really a sprinter. Like
Yeah.
you're running 26 seconds in the 200, you're running 59s in the 400, you're a sprinter that can jump. So
Yeah. Yeah.
where do you see that balance in the high school level?
Yeah. I think it's important. I think you have to do both. Like I rarely see a scenario where I would look at a high schooler and be like, you should only jump.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a big part of that is speed reserve is really important in the jumps. You know, you want to take off at 20 miles per hour, but you don't want that to be so stressful, like so strenuous. Like you want to be a 22 mile per hour sprinter, 23 mile per hour sprinter, which means when you take off at 20, it's manageable because you do have to manage the forces. And that's one of the big things is yeah, an approach needs to be fast, but it needs to be the fastest controllable speed,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is different. Um, so I think when I look at a sprinter who also jumps or a jumper who also sprints, I usually one to what you said about going flies and approaches, like I absolutely ripped that off about Thernhofer this year.
Yeah.
I like because I texted him and I was like, man, I got my sprinters who are jumpers too. And as we drive speed, the board moves all the time. Like they are the least accurate jumpers because the speed is constantly changing. The perception of the board is constantly changing. So he was like, yeah, man, throw them on the track, just go nuts, and then put them on a runway. And they're super primed. They're really fast at the moment. They have to control it, and there's a lot of failure and a lot of frustration in practice, but that's what practice is about. Um, so so that's a big piece of what we do, and that's because board accuracy matters. I don't think it's the most important single thing all the time. I don't drive. I try not to drive athletes to get frustrated by board accuracy. Like we, at the end of the day, jump big. If you scratch a little bit, we can adjust. But so when it comes to like the sprinter jumper, I think speed reserve is important. I think the ability to control it is important. When I'm when I consider the two athletes, when I look at a pure jumper, I'm like, all right, this is an athlete who is going to handle tremendous forces. And when you look at patterns, it's like, all right, these are joint injuries, like high risk joint injury, ankle, knee, hip, low back. When you look at a sprinter, these are high risk soft tissue injuries, just typically pattern wise.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, so you're taking a kid and you're exposing them to both. So one of two things happens. They absolutely implode on themselves because they're getting both styles of injuries,
Yeah.
or they become a lot more resilient. So I postulate that if you expose them to both in appropriate volumes and with good connection, you develop a far more resilient athlete. And I think you develop a better long sprinter than a lot of people are prepared for. You know, Christian Taylor in the 400. I think Will Clay maybe even ran the 4. I thought they had like at Florida, they had a jumps 4x4 that was like 304 or something crazy.
I mean, when you're talented like that too, just let's be honest.
Yeah, but you know, going back to Bob Sternhofer, who recently spoke at Elmer's, part of what he talked about with his 400-meter runners, I think he had 4 guys under 45 or 4 guys under 46 or something like that, and
Yeah.
or 3 guys who ran 45 and one who was like 46 low. And he said a big part of it was reactive strength through plyometrics, which tends to get overlooked in the 400. And his, you know, there's not a lot of hard science evidence behind this, but him talking to athletes, me having been a 400-meter runner at one point, there is something to that late stage long sprint ability to just like pound the track.
Yeah, 100%.
Like you know, it's rhythmic, it's an ability to just bounce off the track, and when that's like the thing you're doing day after day after day, like you get better at it. So I think the sprint jump connection, while done improperly, is super high risk, while also can be very frustrating to an athlete, because even if you are sprint high jump, your high jump approach changes all the time, and it's really frustrating. But if the kid is prepared for like, hey, when your board is moving all the time, that's kind of a good thing, in that it means you're getting faster.
Yeah.
But you develop a super resilient athlete, and frankly, down the road, long term, you get a crazy good athlete. You know, with Ricky, our joke is he's moving. We're actually reducing what he does to like triple jump 60-100. Well, he can long jump. If we spent 6 weeks on it, he can go 7 meters, probably pretty easy, which would be close to our school record. If we spent 6 weeks on it, he's got a background in hurtling. He could probably run under 16 flat in the hurdles off of a few weeks of training.
Yeah.
He could probably also jump, you know, pretty close to 2 meters in high jump off a few weeks. Like he's ready. He's like 6 weeks out of competing in almost any event.
Yeah.
And it's because we're training everything all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Accuracy, power, speed, acceleration, upright mechanics. And I think the real joy of the sprint jump athlete is you can train upright mechanics sub maximally and they're totally cool with it.
Yep.
There's no pushback, there's no frustration with timing or speeds. It's like, no, we're working upright mechanics, and then that translates into what they do running speed.
Yeah.
You know, I've reached a point where I feel like 90% of like I'll write the workouts, but 90% of what I need you to do is just like not try to do the wrong thing. Like, you put a sprinter out on a track and be like, I don't need you to try to lift your knee up. Like, it'll happen. We'll be there. Or a high jumper, like, I don't need you to try to arch. Like, you have all the gifts. If we just execute, it's there. And finding that way to like connect the sprinter jumper and be like, this, you know, this upright mechanics drill doesn't feel fast, and a true pure sprinter doesn't want to do it, but a sprint jumper is like, oh, this is runway work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it connects in the sprints and you're like, that was easy.
Yeah.
You know,
and there's like, so if you layer it, there's so much resistance in blending people together in this in the high school realm. Like, you get a kid that's a talented athlete, they're like, no, he's going to only do this, he's going to only do that, and there's such a separation where you look at the sprinter jumper and you can see the correlations. Typically a good 60 guy is going to be a better long jumper. A typical 400 meter, like, you can take a triple jump guy and put him into the 400 meters because you could just relate the ground contacts. You know, the contacts in the last 200 or 400 are way slower than you're talking about a 60-meter runner. So it makes sense that a triple jumper can correlate to that. but you overlay it, and it's like you're sprinting at high velocities twice a week, usually in a good sprints program.
Yeah,
Usually
yeah,
you're it really hard. Okay. So then what are you doing on the other days? Well, you're doing some sort of like med ball works, tempo work, you're doing some sort of jump training and all that stuff. So it's like, why isn't the jump training just supplementary to the sprint work and vice versa? Like,
yeah,
really it. I just
yeah,
don't understand. Like, it's such an easy overlap.
yeah, yeah.
We took up a lot of your time, but let's reconnect after this, and we'll talk about some other topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Good talking to you.
All right, Dave. Have a good one, man.
All right. You too.
Bye.